Stallone sat beside the broken soldier and silenced an entire airport. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The atmosphere in the Terminal 4 boarding area at LAX was a familiar purgatory of stale, recycled air and collective anxiety. A delayed flight to Chicago had frayed the nerves of 100 strangers, their forced proximity creating a low-grade, simmering tension. The drone of rolling luggage, the tinny blare of gate announcements, and the cacophony of a dozen one-sided phone calls formed the soundtrack to their shared limbo. Among them, seeking the cloak of anonymity that only a chaotic public space can sometimes provide, was Sylvester Stallone. He sat in a hard plastic chair, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, engrossed in a worn paperback. He was a figure of stillness in a sea of agitated motion, a man content to be overlooked. Holding court near the charging station was Kyler Vance, a man in his late 20s who radiated the unassailable confidence of new money. Dressed in designer athletic wear that cost more than a mortgage payment, he spoke loudly into his AirPods, his conversation a fire hose of tech bro jargon about synergy, disruption, and scaling. He was the kind of man who saw the world as a system to be hacked, and other people as either assets or obstacles. The third vertex of the afternoon's impending moral triangle was a young man sitting a few rows away from Stallone. He was in his early 30s, with the lean, hard look of a career soldier, but his eyes held a story of deep, abiding weariness. He wore simple, functional clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt, and on the floor beside him sat a battered military-style backpack. He stared intently at the scuffed toes of his boots, his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap, a small, repetitive motion that betrayed a significant internal struggle. He was Corporal David Miller, though no one there knew his name or rank. He was just a man trying to hold himself together against the overwhelming tide of noise and chaos. The final player was Brenda, the gate agent. She was a woman in her 50s, her face etched with the permanent exhaustion of someone who has spent 2 decades dealing with the entitled, the angry, and the desperate. Her patience was a finite resource, and it was running dangerously low. The stage was set, the players in place, all simmering in the pressure cooker of a delayed flight, waiting for the one event that would cause it all to boil over. The shift from collective, low-grade misery to a focused, personal drama happened in an instant. The gate agent, Brenda, clicked on her microphone, her voice a flat, tired monotone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are still waiting for clearance from the tower. We appreciate your patience." A collective groan rippled through the waiting area. It was this sound, this new wave of frustration, that seemed to be the final straw for Corporal Miller. The young man, who had been struggling to maintain his composure, suddenly stood up. But it wasn't a normal movement. It was jerky, uncoordinated. His face was pale, beaded with sweat, and his eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at something 1,000 yards beyond the terminal walls. He was no longer in LAX. He was somewhere else, a place of noise and fire and fear. He took a few unsteady steps, bumping into a trash can, the clang of which made him flinch violently. He was having a panic attack, a full-blown dissociative episode, and the crowded, chaotic gate had become his battlefield. He needed space. He needed to ground himself. He staggered toward the empty boarding lane, the one space clear of people, and sank to the floor, curling into a tight ball, his head in his hands, his breathing ragged and shallow. It was a desperate, silent scream for help. Brenda, the gate agent, saw it happen, but she didn't see a man in crisis. She saw a security protocol being violated. She saw a disruption. She saw a problem that needed to be solved, and quickly. She marched from behind her counter, her face a mask of stern, professional annoyance. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through Miller's private hell. "Sir, you can't be on the floor. You're blocking the boarding lane." Stallone looked up from his book, his gaze sharpening. Kyler Vance ended his call, an irritated smirk on his face as he watched the scene unfold. The inciting incident had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet collapse of a man who had already endured too much. Brenda, the gate agent, operating on a script written by airline policy and years of jaded experience, intensified her approach. "Sir, I need you to get up. Right now. This is a secure area." Her words were not compassionate. They were commands, delivered with the impatient tone one uses for a broken machine. Corporal Miller didn't respond. He couldn't. He was lost in the storm, his hands pressed over his ears as if to block out more than just the sounds of the airport. The tension in the area began to coalesce around this small, tragic scene. Kyler Vance, who viewed any disruption to his schedule as a personal affront, let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," he said, not to anyone in particular, but to the room at large. He pushed himself off the wall he was leaning against and sauntered closer, a look of amused contempt on his face. He saw not a human being in distress, but an obstacle, an inefficiency in the system. "Hey, pal," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed the top of Miller's bowed head. "Whatever little drama you've got going on, can you take it somewhere else? Some of us have planes to catch and million-dollar deals to close." The comment was a poison dart, and it found its mark not in Miller, but in the growing crowd of onlookers. A few people tittered nervously. Others murmured in agreement, their own frustration with the delay making them allies of the aggressor. They saw what Vance wanted them to see. Not a veteran having a PTSD episode, but a drama queen holding them all hostage. Brenda, feeling the crowd's impatience on her side, felt emboldened. "Sir, this is your final warning. If you do not get up, I will have to call airport security." Stallone watched the pack mentality forming, the casual cruelty of the crowd turning on the weakest member. His jaw was set like concrete. He slowly, deliberately closed his paperback, the soft swish of the pages a quiet counterpoint to the escalating ugliness. He placed the book on the empty seat beside him. The time for quiet observation was rapidly coming to an end. The aggression, now a two-pronged assault from the jaded bureaucrat and the arrogant tech bro, reached its peak. Brenda reached for the phone behind her counter, her finger hovering over the button for security. Kyler Vance, relishing his role as the voice of the put-upon masses, took a step closer to Miller, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You know what this is?" Vance announced to his captive audience. "This is a performance. He's hoping they'll feel sorry for him. Maybe bump him up to first class for his troubles. He just wants attention." A few more people in the crowd laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. The accusation, so profoundly ignorant and heartless, was the spark that ignited the powder keg. It was a desecration of a pain that Vance could not even begin to comprehend. At that moment, Sylvester Stallone stood up. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy of motion that instantly drew every eye. He didn't march or stomp. He simply unfolded himself from his chair and walked calmly into the center of the storm. He stopped beside Brenda, then turned his gaze to Kyler Vance. His face was unreadable, a calm granite mask. "Maybe," Stallone said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air, silencing the chatter around them. "You should back off and let the man breathe." The entire gate area fell silent. Brenda froze, her hand still on the phone. Vance's smirk faltered as he recognized the iconic face beneath the baseball cap. For a moment, he was starstruck, but his innate arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He saw a chance to joust with a celebrity, to prove he wasn't intimidated. "Whoa, easy there, champ," Vance said, trying for a tone of light-hearted banter that fell completely flat. "I'm just trying to help this lady do her job. This guy is causing a scene." It was then that Stallone's principled stand began to truly take form. He took off his baseball cap, revealing the full force of his famous, world-weary eyes, and fixed them on Vance. "No," Stallone corrected him, his voice dropping another octave, becoming even quieter and more intense. "You're causing a scene. He's just trying to survive one." The breaking point arrived not with a shout, but with a quiet, devastating question. Kyler Vance, refusing to cede the floor, puffed out his chest. His ego would not allow him to be publicly corrected. "Look, Mr. Stallone," he said, adopting the tone of a man patiently explaining a complex reality to a naive child. "I respect you, but this is the real world. There are rules. There are schedules, and one person's emotional issues can't be allowed to derail everything for everyone else. It's a simple cost-benefit analysis. This final, clinical dismissal of a man's trauma, reducing it to a line item on a spreadsheet of inconvenience, was the final, unforgivable offense. It was a statement so devoid of humanity that it pushed Stallone from a state of controlled anger into one of cold, righteous fury. The calmness in Stallone's demeanor didn't break. It sharpened into a diamond-hard point. He took a slow step toward Vance, who instinctively recoiled. The celebrity, the actor, was gone. This was a man confronting a profound moral rot. He leaned in, his voice a barely audible whisper, forcing Vance and the now silent Brenda to lean in to hear. Cost-benefit analysis? Stallone whispered, the words laced with a chilling contempt. Let me ask you a question. He paused, letting the silence stretch, his eyes boring into Vance's. What's the benefit of the freedom you have to stand here in your $1,000 shoes and run your mouth? Vance was stunned in his silence, completely wrong-footed by the question. Before he could stammer a response, Stallone answered for him, his voice still a whisper, but each word a hammer blow. The cost was paid by men like him. He gestured with his head toward Corporal Miller, who was still on the floor, rocking slightly. The cost was paid in places you've never been, on days you'll never have to experience. The cost was paid with pieces of their body and pieces of their soul. With the moral high ground now firmly, unassailably his, Stallone delivered a condemnation so powerful it seemed to alter the very air in the terminal. The crowd was frozen, a captive audience to a public reckoning. Stallone's whispered words continued, a relentless, devastating dismantling of Kyler Vance's entire worldview. You see a man who wants attention, Stallone said, his voice dripping with scorn. I see a man who spent 2 tours in Hellman Province getting the kind of attention that would make you cry for your mother. The kind of attention that comes from IEDs and sniper fire. The kind of attention that leaves behind ghosts that follow you home and show up in the middle of a crowded airport. He then turned his withering gaze, for just a second, on Brenda the gate agent. You see a man breaking the rules. I see a man whose body is still following the rules of the battlefield he can't escape. He turned back to Vance, who looked as though he was about to be physically ill. You talk about your $1 million deals. His deals were made in blood. He was fighting for his brothers, fighting for his country, fighting for the very concept of a home to come back to. All while you were probably back here, fighting for a better seed round for your new app. The contrast was brutal, a stark juxtaposition of a life of consequence and a life of comfort. Stallone's voice dropped even lower, becoming a sound of pure, concentrated fury and sorrow. So you stand there and you tell me he just wants attention? Let me tell you something. The last thing on this earth a man like that wants is your attention. He wants your silence. He wants your respect. And he wants 5 damn minutes to find his way back from a war you will never, ever understand. The power dynamic had been annihilated. Vance was no longer an antagonist. He was a symbol of everything shallow and selfish, publicly vivisected by a man speaking for the silent, wounded warrior at his feet. Having verbally dismantled the antagonists, Stallone's definitive action was one of profound, unexpected solidarity. It was an act that spoke louder than any of his powerful words. He turned his back completely on the shell-shocked Kyler Vance and the mortified Brenda, rendering them insignificant. He ignored the gaping crowd, the cameras that were inevitably filming, and the entire chaotic world of the airport. His focus narrowed to one person, the young man on the floor. Corporal Miller had slowly uncurled during Stallone's speech, as if the words themselves were a shield, pushing back the chaos. He was now sitting up, his back against the support pillar, his breathing still ragged but slower. He looked up and saw the world-famous actor standing over him, not with pity, but with a look of fierce, protective understanding. Stallone then did the last thing anyone expected. He lowered himself down, not with the creak of an older man, but with a fluid, controlled motion, and sat on the cold, dirty linoleum floor of the airport terminal, right next to Corporal Miller. He didn't say anything. He just sat, his back against the same pillar, creating a silent, unbreachable perimeter of support around the struggling veteran. It was an act of profound humility and immense power. He had withdrawn from the argument, from the world of the arrogant and the ignorant, and had chosen to enter the world of the hurting. He was no longer a celebrity intervening. He was a man sitting with another man, sharing his space, his silence, his struggle. This was his walk-off. He had walked off the stage of public opinion and onto the battlefield of one man's private war, and in doing so, had declared his allegiance in the most powerful way imaginable. He was on the ground with the soldier. The immediate aftermath of Stallone's silent, powerful action was a moment of profound, suspended animation at the gate. The buzzing crowd fell utterly silent. The sheer, unexpected humanity of the gesture, a global superstar sitting on a dirty airport floor to comfort a stranger, was so powerful it short-circuited everyone's brain. Kyler Vance stood frozen for a moment, his face a kaleidoscope of shame, anger, and disbelief. He had been so thoroughly, so publicly, and so quietly demolished that there was no possible response. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around for support, but found only the cold, judgmental stares of the crowd that had, minutes before, been his allies. He turned, his movements jerky and robotic, and fled, disappearing into the anonymity of the terminal, a man running from his own public disgrace. Brenda, the gate agent, looked at the two men on the floor, then at the faces of the passengers, and her professional mask finally crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shame, of regret, of a humanity she had momentarily forgotten. Without a word, she walked to the staff water cooler, filled a cup, and timidly approached the two men. She knelt down and offered the water to Corporal Miller, her hand trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Miller, his breathing now almost normal, looked at her, then at Stallone, and slowly took the cup. The crowd, watching this small act of penance, seemed to breathe a collective sigh. An older man in a Navy veteran cap walked over, took off his hat, and simply held it over his heart, a silent salute to both the soldier on the floor and the man sitting beside him. Then a soft, respectful applause began to build, not the wild cheering of a movie premiere, but a quiet, heartfelt ovation, a public acknowledgement of the profound lesson in decency they had all just received. The story of the LAX takedown spread with the speed of a fighter jet. The video, captured on at least 10 different phones, was a viral supernova. It was raw, dramatic, and deeply emotional. The contrast between Vance's sneering arrogance and Stallone's quiet, formidable defense of a young veteran was perfect narrative fuel. #StalloneSits became the #1 trending topic in the world. News outlets everywhere picked up the story, not just as a celebrity item, but as a significant cultural moment. The footage was analyzed on morning shows, cable news panels, and online forums. Kyler Vance was publicly crucified. His name, his company, and his face were plastered everywhere, a poster boy for tech bro entitlement and heartless insensitivity. His company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting, and by the next day, Vance had been forced to issue a groveling public apology and take an indefinite leave of absence. His career as a public-facing tech guru was over. The airline, caught in the crossfire, also went into damage control. They issued a public apology to Corporal Miller, offered him a lifetime of free flights, and announced a new, mandatory training program for all customer-facing staff on how to assist travelers with invisible disabilities, including PTSD. The public reaction was a massive outpouring of support for both Stallone and Corporal Miller. Veterans hotlines reported a surge in calls, both from veterans seeking help and from civilians wanting to donate or volunteer. The incident had shown a harsh, bright light on the daily, often invisible, struggles of returning soldiers, and the public's response was one of overwhelming empathy and a desire to help. In the long run, the consequences of that single, tense hour at an airport gate were profound and far-reaching. Corporal David Miller, who had been struggling in silence for years, was suddenly embraced by a system that had previously overlooked him. Stallone, true to form, quietly connected him with the best private PTSD specialists in the country. Miller, empowered by the support and the knowledge that he was not alone, became a powerful advocate for mental health awareness among veterans. He started a nonprofit that helped soldiers transition back to civilian life, his own story a beacon of hope for thousands. Kyler Vance became a cautionary tale, a lesson taught in business ethics classes about the astronomical cost of a lack of empathy. His attempt to rebrand himself a year later as a socially conscious investor was met with widespread public ridicule. He was a man forever defined by his worst moment. For Stallone, the incident only solidified his legacy as a man of substance and integrity. He had used his immense platform not for self-aggrandizement, but to lift up the forgotten, to defend the vulnerable, and to teach a masterclass in human decency without ever raising his voice. The incident sparked a much-needed national dialogue. It forced people to confront the uncomfortable truth that supporting the troops means more than just putting a yellow ribbon magnet on a car. It means making space for their pain, being patient with their struggles, and showing them the same courage and respect they showed us, especially when it's inconvenient. The ultimate lesson was clear. Patriotism isn't about parades and platitudes. It's about what you do in the quiet, difficult moments. It's about whether you choose to be the person who scoffs a struggling soldier, or the person who is willing to sit down on a cold, dirty floor and silently say, "I'm with you. You are not alone."